Welcome to Learn Live UAE. Really excited to introduce episode 1 to you this evening. And I'd like to say Ramadan Kareem to everybody as well. My name's Olly Lewis. I'm assistant head at the British International School in Abu Dhabi.
Hi everybody, I'm Mark Anderson. Ramadan Kareem to you as well. I'm a Director of ICT Evangelist and a former school leader and teacher for a few years. And it's really great to be able to sort of bring this initiative together, working with Olly. We've been friends for a number of years, and it's just great to be able to bring lots of fantastic voices together to discuss issues surrounding education. Obviously, we've got a focus on the United Arab Emirates, but the things we'll be talking about will have ramifications and links to education across the world. And so we're really looking forward to having a fantastic set of shows. We've got some fantastic guests lined up for this evening, haven't we, Olly?
We have, yeah. We're really lucky to have with us Al Kingsley, Jeremy Williams and Philippa Wraithmell in this show. We'll let them introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about their context and their story. In this show, our episode 1, we're going to look at the successful ingredients for leading online learning. I think it's probably best, Mark, if just before we invite our guests in, we kind of give some context as to why we set the show up.
Sure.
Watching. No secret that you and I have been friends for a long time now. You pride yourself and you're a fantastic sharer within the educational community. And I think that's what kind of drove us to form this initiative, wasn't it? It was the chance to connect, again, reflect, draw on that collective experience with other educators across the region, and build a teaching community in the United Arab Emirates online that can aid professional development for anybody and provide a voice for educators in the region.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's fantastic about the platform we're using, it means that we can be really agile. And so if there are changes and transitions across our professional learning networks, and because we've been teaching and connecting with educators around the world for a long time now, it means that we can bring people together to help sort of have these conversations to help everybody else, because education, after all, is a force for good. We got into this business to help change lives and make the world a better place. And what better way to do that than by bringing lots of people together to share the wealth of knowledge that we have as a massive educational community. So thank you so much for joining us. It's lovely to be getting some comments from people straight away. So thank you to Nigel and Henry and Al, and Jeremy's just commented as well. He's going to be joining us as our first guest in just a few moments. Please do share this with your teams in schools as well. What's beautiful about this platform, if you can't make it actually live, and it's great to come and join us live, because you can do things like Jeremy's done here and Nigel's done here. You can send through questions and comments, and we can share those really easily with you, and we can respond to them really quickly as well. What you can also do is you can sort of go down to the corner over here, I think it is, and hit the subscribe button. We're going to be running a competition as well. We're trying to work out what the prize can be at the moment, because it's going to be difficult to get anything sent out at the moment. But the first 100 subscribers to the channel, we're going to put into a lucky dip. And we'll probably use a little tool called Wheel of Names and put everybody's names in there and give it a little ra-da-da-da-da-da-da, and then give a prize to the person who gets that. So that's what we're looking to try and do. But should we bring Jeremy in to start sharing and talk about his perspectives on online learning?
Certainly, yeah. Jeremy, welcome to the show.
It's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Do you just want to share with the guests kind of what your role is out here in the UAE, please, and
yeah,
about yourself?
Sure. I've been out in the UAE now for 4 years, leading a school called Manor Hall International School in Al Ain. It is a pre-K through 12th grade American curriculum school. And yeah, been out here for 4 years and just been enjoying the experience of being out of the U.S. educational system and in a much more collaborative and engaging UAE, ever-changing UAE educational system. But nonetheless, it's been great to be out here, and I'm really honored to be your first guest.
Thanks for coming on the show. It's great to have you. I'd sort of echo that, having been in the region for 2 years now. It's great to have sort of freedom within education, I think, and be able to chart your own path with various curricula. I remember we had a conversation when we first met face to face at Bet Middle East last year, and you were talking about trying to instill in your students and start up new curriculum pathways within your school that were kind of more suited to potential roles that they might see within the next kind of 10, 20, 30 years within the real workforce, as opposed to traditional curriculum.
Yeah, I think when you look at the U.S. educational system, you have, Algebra 1 being typically a 9th grade math class as an example, yet so much of the math that's taught for the sophomore, junior, and senior year, there's very few professions that are actively using that. So we are trying to work with students to have a curricular experience that's a little more suited to their interests and passions, and trying to get them exposure to different learning opportunities so they can kind of make informed decisions when they go off to uni about what things they might be interested in.
Yeah, that's fantastic. It's great that kind of, I think by doing that for the students, you're instilling that quality of leadership. So I might delve into our first question for you, which is hopefully you can touch on what I'm alluding to, which is, what are the key ingredients then for successful leadership?
I think for leadership in general, the most important aspect of it is building trust and having relationships. So I think, when you think about doing that in the brick and mortar context, I feel like that's really easy to do. You see people at the water cooler, you go into their classrooms, you visit with them at lunch, you have all of these different experiences where you are having these touch points with people, and not just with staff, but with students and with parents also. And then when you move to this sort of virtual environment, for someone who is relationally oriented and driven, it's really, really hard when suddenly you lose that. And I've realized how much of those day-to-day interactions really fuel a lot of my energy and passion for what I do. So it's been a really different experience for the past 7 weeks.
It's really interesting that you mentioned that, Jeremy. I read a great post just this last week by Sean Allison, who wrote Making Every Lesson Count. And he's talking about his leadership and how those touch points and those other things have sort of been removed, and suggested some ideas for how he's doing those sort of things under lockdown. How are you achieving that with your colleagues and the students in the hall?
It's been a varied approach. So playing Fortnite with some of my students in the secondary program, I am trying to touch base through WhatsApp. I think the challenge is you're trying to figure out ways to keep in touch that isn't going to overwhelm people and isn't going to add to the stress pile of what they're dealing with or the anxiety of what they're dealing with. And one thing I've learned is sometimes a simple "how you doing" WhatsApp for some people can be really great, but for others it's like, oh, what happened? What's wrong? Is there a reason that Jeremy's sending me this? So I think for me, it's been trying to figure out what works best for everyone, and then making sure across the SLT that there's key touch points and we're all focused on wellness. I think you've probably seen the stuff that's come out with the UAE digital learning evaluation that's happening. And one of the things that's really exciting about that framework when you dive into it is how really wellness for all is kind of at the center of it. And, you think about some of the things that you hope stick through this. For me, one of the things that I hope sticks through it is that well-being and wellness focus and having that really centered in the basis of what everyone's doing. I think everyone's really concerned about everyone's well-being from just a health perspective. But now that we're getting into this for 7 weeks, I think the mental health perspective is becoming something that we're starting to take on and have some pretty serious concerns about. People who are by themselves and are isolated. There's plenty of people who love, my oldest son, Amadeo, loves being at home. He is an introvert and he really enjoys all of this. He's 7 weeks in and he misses school and his friends, but he really enjoys being at home in general. And then, I look at Artem, my middle child, and he's, raring to go and he doesn't understand why he can't go to the arcade. So I think even when you stretch that out among adults, I think there's a kind of a various degree of happiness in this situation that people find. And it's hard to be supportive, but making sure that you're coming from a place where it's not stressing people out or making them feel concerned.
That's great. The second question was about how does leadership differ online compared to face-to-face? Knowing there's lots and lots of expats who work in schools such as yours, and our guest later on, and I hope you won't mind me saying this, like Philippa, she's there with a family surrounding her husband and children, but there's lots of young teachers who travel to the Middle East. I remember working at the Al Najah school in Abu Dhabi, and there were so many young, in their 20s, single teachers there. Have you come across any issues with people who don't have that sort of familial sort of structure around them? And is there anything that the school's doing to support those people?
Yeah, so one of the things that we do that I think has really helped is, and we have all of our single staff, single women specifically, in the same building, and our single men in the same building. And so I know that they are observing social distancing, but also having that kind of social interaction, more regular social interaction than someone would have if they were just living in some random, apartment complex in Abu Dhabi. So I think that is something that's been really helpful. We did do an online trivia night. The staff did it a couple days ago. So trying to find ways to keep it interesting, and also trying to respect people who, are okay and don't necessarily feel like they want to be a part of something like that. They have other things they want to do. I have one teacher who's read 35 books, my PE teacher. So people are finding all sorts of different ways of coping. And as long as it's healthy for them, I think it's just my job to try to support that, and also to just make sure that, we're keeping an eye on everyone and making sure that everyone's okay. In the student perspective, we're starting to hear things kind of bubble up from some of our secondary students and feeling a bit isolated at this point. So trying to find some things to do online with them and make sure that our counselors and our folks that are doing the pastoral care work are getting access with them within an environment that's safeguarded is more challenging in this environment than it would be if we were in normal school.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just mentioning before the show with Philippa about using Minecraft and shared worlds. A friend of mine shared a resource that he's been using with his school, where children can come together in Minecraft Education Edition and work on solving ciphers in an escape room, to help them learn about that sort of stuff in computing and what have you. And that's a great way for them to engage and interact whilst doing learning in a fun and engaging way at the same time. More of that sort of stuff, I think, is going to be really helpful as we move forwards.
The other challenging thing that I would say is that we've made the decision to be asynchronous. So for us, we felt like if we were going to put well-being for parents and students at the focus of what we were doing, that demanding them to be on time online at a certain time when they may have 4 or 5 children who shared across 2 devices just wasn't the way to go for us. So we're asynchronous with like a live office hours that happens weekly. And that's, I think, for us, the right path for our school and for our community. But, it is challenging because parents are, they all have strong opinions on what they want, and no 2 opinions are the same. So trying to make sure that you're maintaining a really high amount of flexibility with parents on submissions and things like that really help to keep the calm for everyone. And just being human, again, putting the well-being of everyone at the forefront of what's going on and thinking about everyone as humans, and losing the scope and sequence a little bit and just being more focused on making sure everyone's okay while there's no, discontinuity in their learning has, I think, been good for all of us.
It's definitely something that I've noticed with all the schools that I work with about it being sort of contextual. There's no real right answer. It's about knowing what's right for your community, and you're not going to get that right straight away. These are really strange times, but like you said, what's right for your school is to have a more asynchronous approach. Some schools are doing a bit of both. Some are trying to work all synchronously. But it's, again, thinking about your context, isn't it? Are there any sort of synchronous things that you're doing? The office hours are normal.
Yeah, we'll have the office hours, and that'll there'll be more of a social emotional piece that's happening with the little kids, the little guys that'll happen live. And so with the big kids, we have seniors that are getting ready for the Arabic and Islamic exam. We're having live support for them. But for the most part, it's pre-recorded lessons that we're using with the synchronous support that happens on a weekly basis per course, per grade. And we'll continue to, survey our stakeholders and see how they feel about it. I think that's the other part too. For people who like to be really planny and really structured in how things go, this has forced all of us to kind of get into this build, measure, repeat sort of quick quick cycle of innovation and figuring out what works best for our local community. So that is something for someone who is extremely detail oriented, or maybe more of like they want the 3-year strategic plan and they want to follow it really linearly. This has kind of turned us into this really small intervals of cyclical, innovation and trying to figure out what works best. And it's I think all in all, there's no right way to go about this, kind of like you mentioned, Mark, but I feel like trying to do the best to just remain human and supportive of all of our people, both within our school and outside of our school, is the only real right way forward in all of this.
Yeah, some great lessons there as well, Jeremy, in clarity of communication, I think is key with all stakeholders in the schools. And it's great to hear that that's kind of that and a focus on well-being is at the heart of everything that you're doing within your school, because I think, we're all learning as we go. And it's great to hear you be an advocate for the fact that there is necessarily no right or wrong way about things, because everyone's context is different. I think the joy of this process, because it is a bit of a cyclical process, as you've said, is the fact that we can kind of pick and choose and adapt our process as we go along to figure out what works best for everybody. I think you said there as well, it's a real challenge in all through school as well, because the needs of different students at different phases are so different that sometimes you have to adopt different approaches within those different phases across an entire school, and that's quite often when stakeholders can find it really challenging, especially if you've got a household where you've got multiple children within that household and limited devices. In terms then of kind of going back to what you've said on we're very planning people as educators. How do you foresee then within your kind of leadership head on us changing that in the near future once we do return back to normal? Kind of what lesson will be learned on that kind of less cyclical but more linear nature?
Yeah, I mean, I think the big thing is I don't ever expect to be in an interview process for a headship again where I'm not asked what my digital learning plan is. That was not a question that anyone would ask prior to this, but now, that is kind of like a status quo. You should expect to be asked that. And, I think if we look at this realistically, and we look at, how forward thinking the UAE government is and how safety oriented and how, citizen focused they are, I just don't imagine them taking any chances on an unsafe environment. So I think probably until a vaccine is in hand, being able to go in and out of the remote learning, distance learning environment to the brick and mortar is going to be probably something that we all have to become pretty well versed in flipping that switch and going back and forth. Yeah. It's my hope that we'll be, back in the brick and mortar environment as consistently as we can. But, I'm definitely feeling like, at least at this point now, going through this, we know what to do. And all the stakeholders would be definitely much more prepared for what this would be like. I do think that it's, from a parent perspective, to switch gears for a second, it's massively different. I have a KG1 student who is using Seesaw and really enjoying it. And then I have a first grader who's using some Education City, some code.org and some other things, within his learning and Class Dojo portfolio. And so it's, even though they're 2 years apart, it's fascinating to see the different ways that the online learning developmentally is appropriate for them just across 2 years. And so when you then stretch that across, 14 years of education, thinking about how to make it the best for everyone. And especially if you're in a small school where you may not have as much SLT or middle leadership to really kind of, moderate or manage that, it can become pretty challenging.
Yeah, that reminds me of, I read a report a while ago now in a job interview. I was asked to prepare a 3-minute speech on how do you reduce in-school variation in schools? And there's 5 strands to that, and teaching learning quality is one of them. And at the moment, technology is kind of the bridge between the teachers and the learners. And I think there's, parallels in that as well, in the essence of the fact that there's lots of teachers have had to upskill themselves very quickly to help facilitate, the best learning environment they can in the current situation. So I think, there's certainly parallels there as well. with sort of that head on then. Well, I thought of something else as well when you started, and that was going back to the idea of kind of interviews. I think one of those questions you typically get asked as well is, can you tell us a time when you were resilient? Well, I think everyone now will say, well, I was resilient during online learning. That might be a question that's stricken off the interview question list.
Probably so. Yeah, it's a prerequisite now.
Yeah.
If I can just jump in for a second, it was really interesting what you said before about the cyclical process. I mean, that's a very iterative process, isn't it, around design thinking, or it can be used in lots and lots of different scenarios. What I love about what you're sharing as well, Jeremy, I mean, it's clear that you've got a good knowledge of edtech processes and things that are appropriate to be used at different ages and so forth and so on. But what I love is the fact that it's not about seesaw, or the technology isn't driving things. I always remember the sort of school vision for one of my former head teachers, where he shared about positive relationships and mutual respect, and everything that we did as a school sort of hung off those sorts of values. And it's clear that you're taking that same sort of approach about ensuring the relationships are still strong, having those good relationships, keeping the respect going, being mindful of where all your colleagues are at, and it's really fantastic to see from you, Jeremy. So. Thank you very much for that. I'm just going to bring in, if it's okay, our next guest to see if she's got any perspectives on some of the things that you've shared already. So welcome to the discussion. Before we sort of start getting into all of that, can you just, obviously we all know you, but for guests who are here, Philippa, can you share who you are, what you do, and so forth and so on? Is that okay?
Yeah, of course. Hi, I'm Philippa Wraithmell. I currently work at the Cranley School, Abu Dhabi. I moved there in January. I've been teaching in the UAE this is my 4th year now, but I've been teaching for 12 years. Originally a design technology teacher in the UK. I've led 3 departments in the UK for design technology. A lot of them about progression and moving forwards. And then came over here, and I've been leading digital strategies for schools since I started at Repson 3 years ago. So moving into Cranley was really interesting, and it kind of somewhat boosted my my projects and things that I was doing there, because I actually was brought over to help enhance digital learning and to actually kind of really strategize and work out what they were doing and where they were going with things. And we've made some good progress, but they're not a one-to-one device school. Yet they have one-to-one devices from senior upwards, well, from year 7 upwards, as a BYOD, and then the primary is they have iPads, they have devices and computer suites, which kind of made this whole thing really interesting, because there's some fantastic teachers and some incredible things that go on there, but actually in terms of digital learning, it's been such a learning curve for all of those staff there, because actually they've had to kind of go, okay, well, this is what I can do in my lesson, this is what I do face to face with them. I sometimes get iPads out and we do some great things with them, but actually how do I now turn this around and make it something every day online, where students can have that mixture of different styles of teaching from me? How can I get great outcomes, and how can we teach them to learn on an online platform when they perhaps have never been on an online platform before? One of the first things that we introduced was we'd been trialing Seesaw, which we've already mentioned, and actually we ended up rolling it out across the whole of our pre-prep to, well, actually, it's quite interesting. Some of our year 11s use it. We use it for science. So there's a whole mixture, and it's really interesting what Jeremy was saying about having different things in different year groups, because so drama use Seesaw because they love the fact that the students can record themselves, they can create poetry, performances, and things like that. And so actually higher up the school, that's used in a much more practical way, and design technology use it and art use it. But then we have a mixture of the Google Classroom. So we have the background of Google along a lot of the rest of the core subjects, and they use Google from year 4. So there's a huge mixture of things going on, but it's been such a steep learning curve in some respects for a lot of our staff who know, they were embedding things, they were learning things. We've done lots of boot camps and training across the last 6 months, but to be kind of thrown into this environment where it's a non-negotiable all of a sudden is quite interesting for people to be able to do. But they've absolutely thrived. We've been doing so much training, and what I think is really nice to see is staff helping each other now, and there's lots of that kind of collaborative cross year groups, different classes helping one another and showcasing and sharing good practice. with things that they found and things that they now use, which is incredible. So yeah, it's been a progressive few months of this, or well, not even months yet. It feels like it. Yeah.
I say you definitely had to come in and hit the ground running, haven't you?
Yeah, just a little bit. But yeah, it's been good. I mean, it's really knocked months off challenges that, you know, there is that whole thing about changing mindsets, which is the hardest thing. And I think that one of the things for me that's a real takeaway from this, if there is positives, is that I think parents have now realised that technology is not just for their children to be absorbed in at the weekend to distract them, and actually that technology is such a powerful learning tool, and look at what their children are being able to create and develop by using all these resources that teachers are handing to them. So I sort of feel like there's going to be a lot less conversations with parents about screen time and about whether it's meaningful and whether it's useful in the classroom, and a lot more, how creative are you being, and can you stretch my child to learn further digital skills to enhance that part of their learning, or my child has a learning difficulty and I've heard about this app which can help them. I think there's going to be a lot more parents kind of having that deeper understanding of what technology can drive and the positives of it, which I think would be really good.
Thank you. Jeremy mentioned about the importance of relationships in terms of leading on and in his role as head at Manor Hall. How have you been sort of fostering? It's going to be difficult for you. I've switched schools before, you know, and I have to do this sort of thing very quickly with my work now, because I'm going in and meeting people, and then I've got to get that report sort of straight away. And I'm guessing you're probably employing some of the same sort of things that I do to sort of develop those positive relationships really, really quickly. But how are you going about sort of developing those relationships with your sort of parent community and colleagues and the children as well? How are you going about doing that?
So lots of different things really. With my classes that I teach at the moment, I've been doing a lot more collaborative projects, whereas normally I probably would have expected them to work on their own. And one of the things that I find is quite nice, I've actually said to them, you might be in my class right now at this time, but you're in year 8, work with anyone in year 8. You've got friends there. If you work really well with someone, you know, Olly, if you work well with Mark, you're not in the same class, but work together, and kind of getting them to keep those relationships together. So they've got something meaningful to be doing with one another. They can hand work into me, but they're still keeping those relationships going with their friends who they would see every day at school. So there's lots of things like that in terms of projects. In terms of the students across the school, what we've done for our prep school is we've launched Go Bubble, something which we were intending on launching in September to do e-cadets with, and lots of digital online safety and online learning. We actually have launched it early and allowed students to be able to use that to be able to communicate, mainly because for the huge reason of safeguarding is lots of parents talking about things like, you know, let's set up WhatsApp groups for them, let's let them do this, that and the other. And there is always that slight lack of understanding about the dangers of that and how that can go, and how as a school we just felt it was really important for us to be able to put that safe space out there for them. And now they've introduced things like they can do video calling on there and things. So there's some incredible ways they can communicate on there, which is fantastic for us. And also we know as teachers that we can kind of monitor it to a certain degree, but also it means that parents know and have that kind of understanding that that's the best place for them to be having those conversations. And that's definitely built a lot of those relationships up with our parents. And the other things that we've done since the beginning is lots of webinars and parent support. So wellbeing is a huge thing at our school. It's a big driver. We actually have one of our deputy heads is head of wellbeing, and that's a big role that came in this year. She deals with safeguarding and wellbeing of students and staff, and she phones parents a lot. But one of the biggest things we've done is that we've said, what do you feel you need help with? So, you know, do you understand how to help your child with their Google Classroom homework? Do you know where to find their feedback? Do you know how to log on to the Meet? Do you know how to get the Seesaw working? Do you know how to log on to Education City, etc.? So we've done lots of workshops and webinars where we've just taken the questions and helped support them to be able to feel that they can support their children. Because at the end of the day, they're the ones a lot of the time facilitating that, especially as we've mentioned already, there's so many. We've got some parents who've got 5 children, and 5 children, 2 devices. one of them's in year 1 and one of them's in year 10, and you need to be able to balance that. And the last thing you want is a parent feeling that they haven't got control of that because they don't understand the platforms that their children are using. So that was a big thing for us to pinpoint.
Thank you. You've given, I mean, my next question for you really is what are the key ingredients for online learning? I mean, you've alluded to a lot of things there, but I mean, it's obviously a huge thing, isn't it? But can you, in a relatively succinct way, to help viewers who might be taking these ideas away to sort of translate into their schools, can you give sort of maybe the sort of key tenets, perhaps, or the sort of key guiding principles? I mean, Jeremy talked about relationships and so forth and so on. What do you think the key ingredients are for success with online learning? Philippa?
I think clear objectives for lessons. Clear objectives for lessons. So I think your teachers need to know what. Your teachers need to know what they're delivering and what they're. That's okay. Yeah, your teachers need to be really confident with what they're doing, and one of the things that I've found is that they don't need to rely on a platform, that actually they need to have confidence. So I think instilling confidence in our staff that they're educators and they do know what to do and that they just need to be themselves. I think making sure that everyone is aware of the boundaries. So safeguarding is a huge thing in terms of the students understanding to respect those boundaries, but also parents. And I think feedback in terms of student feedback from the teacher, I think is really important to be timely. I don't mean immediate, but within a decent amount of time for it to be relevant to that child still. But then I also think with the parent feedback, that reflecting upon that's one of the biggest things that we've done as a school is we've been taking daily, weekly, lots of checks of different things at different levels and via different mediums to gauge whether what we're doing is right. And we've adapted our processes, and we're very much a mix of synchronous and asynchronous because of having pre-prep and having year 13s. We've got a huge blend of all of that going on. And I think that's really important, to be listening to your community about what their needs are, and supporting it as much as possible, because as Jeremy said as well, one parent needs one thing and another parent needs another, and you can't please everybody all the time. But having those resources available is really easy to be able to say, look, it's there whenever you're ready, and this is there if you can log in at that time. It's really important to be flexible with them. So yeah.
Yeah, it's a great message there, and there's lots of parallels between, although different contexts, your story and Jeremy's as well. The EEF, the Education Endowment Foundation, released a blog a couple of days ago that it was 4 tips for smooth home learning, and there's lots of parallels in what you've both said, replicated in their blog. They talked about finding new routines for the students and being consistent with what you do within your given context. They talked about always looking for the positive, and I think that you've both talked quite heavily there about well-being for all stakeholders, and that really resonates for me, certainly within that blog, making sure that we do focus on the human first. They also talk about modelling positive coping techniques, which again feeds into that idea of clear clarity in your communication, and modelling good well-being. And also the last thing it mentioned was take no shortcuts. You know, it's really, really important that the students and the teachers and the parents really do try to get as much as they can and are capable of out of, you know, the situation that we're in, and you know, adapt to the scenarios. So it's great to hear 2 quite different contexts, but certainly parallels within them. Thanks, guys.
Brilliant stuff. Did you have any comments at all, Jeremy, on the things that Philippa's been sharing?
No, I mean, I think hearing how Philippa is using Seesaw kind of across the school, I think for me, the thing that really resonated in that is thinking about where we are and sort of on our ed tech life cycle, which is we just became a Chromebook school this year. We're starting to, you know, introduce more educational technology into the school. thank God that we did have the one-to-one Chromebooks this year, because if not, we would have been in a really tough situation. But it just was interesting to hear how the different subjects are using the same application, and they're finding that it resonates or it's useful for them. And I think we're kind of earlier in that journey, but kind of figuring that stuff out as well.
That's really interesting. I've seen a lot of schools, particularly for those families where there's a bit of that digital divide. You mentioned, Philippa, 5 children in a family with only 2 devices. Are you doing anything with your actual IT real estate in your schools to support families where there are those sort of issues? So if you've got a new Chromebook initiative one-to-one at Manor Hall, are you sharing some of that technology with families who need it? Either of you?
So we before the official lockdown started, we reached out to all of our parents and said, do you need a device? Are you okay? Is there anything we can do to help you? And what we did was basically we decided that all of our iPads that were going to be in school, they're not going to be used for that foreseeable time. And so what better opportunity would it be than to actually allow our students to be able to utilize them? So we did distribute iPads out to our students, obviously with the prerequisite that they would come back to us in the end. But we've done that, and we also we've distributed them to all of our TAs and to all of our administrative staff, as well as the staff who didn't have them, to be able to allow them to have the best resources to be able to deliver their online learning. But also our TAs have been doing Seesaw training, Google training. They've been doing their cash courses and things like that. So we've kind of spent this time doing a lot of things that will help us in the future of this. So when we either go back in September, or if we're online learning again at any point, hopefully not in the near future, but if that happens, we've got staff who are fully skilled right from the core of it, so that everything that we do, everyone is up to a certain skill level. So we'd like everyone to be Google Certified Educator Level 1, because we see the benefits of that on an administrative side as well as being on an education side. And we're training all of our TAs to have all those different things as well. So we've kind of done the whole community really. We've said, look, there are going to be expectations for everybody to be able to be part of this, to help to support each other. And TAs can be as much of a support externally whilst they're on remote learning as they can be in the classroom. So we've done a lot to be able to help them to still be able to do those supports for the teachers. Thank you. How about yourself, Jeremy?
For us, one of the equity issues that we had to take on with this was that our staff all didn't have machines. So, we provide teachers with desktop setup in their classroom, but when you remove the classroom, we, did not decide to pack up the desktops and send them all home with people. So it was really about making sure that all of our staff members either had their own laptop or something that they could use remotely. And for some of our teachers that maybe this is their, I think of my librarian, who, this is her first real foray into anything educational technology related. For her, making sure she had a camera so she could record video. All of these things were things that we really had to take a focus on, because we were one-to-one with student devices. That wasn't really an issue for us. But then the other issue was, for example, Class Dojo Portfolio, which is our main platform from KG1 until grade 3, getting parents to understand how to do submissions and figuring out, we did not have Arabic and Islamic teachers in Class Dojo. It was pretty much used only on the English medium subjects, getting all of those teachers trained and getting them involved. So it was really a lot more focus on how to make sure that the staff had access to have the tools that they needed to do their work, and a lot of quick learning during our spring break to kind of get everyone up to speed and ready to roll.
That's fantastic. Do you have any comments yourself, Ollie, as well, from a sort of BISAD perspective?
Yes, it's great to hear, there's parallels in lots of our stories. I think everyone's really just banded together, much like the educational community. We're at our school, we're just trying to look out for everybody. So we've lent out iPads to any families that need them. In the primary school, secondary school, we use laptops. So we've lent devices out to the students that need them, and parents that have come forward. Again, we, like Philippa, surveyed our parents to say, look, do you need an extra device? Is there anything that we can support you with? We've provided ongoing CPD for all of our staff throughout the process. We're also in the same position where our support staff and our TAs have been kind of fully immersed within online learning and had support and training to help facilitate and help students on a one-to-one basis. So our inclusion support team have been fantastic there in upskilling kind of a large proportion of our school to help some key stakeholders, the students, facilitate their regular working day, as it were, whilst we approach it. We're similar to Philippa School in many contexts. We've kind of gone for a blended approach of synchronous and asynchronous because that just happens to be best for us at the time. Our rationale for that is we want some sort of element of live teaching because that enables the students to make a connection with each other and the teachers, which we feel is really important for their own well-being. And the flip side to that is we also set them stuff that they can work flexibly at their own pace. But teachers are still providing that face-to-face live check-in, as well as Q&A and feedback to students, because we think that's really, really important. We've surveyed parents twice now, and the responses have been fantastic. As is mirrored with Philippa and Jeremy's schools, you're always going to get one or two parents that are struggling, but plans have been put in place to help and support them to ensure that they feel supported and their communication is there for them along the way. So it's great to hear. I feel like we're doing the right thing. I knew we were anyway. Now I've heard Philippa and Jeremy talk about safeguarding well-being and communication and empathetic arm and trust. It's good to know that we're all doing what's right for us within our given context and our students.
That's fantastic. I run another show with Bookie Youssef, sort of sharing stories and things. And one of the things we do within that show is we get someone from primary, secondary, and FE in. And that's something else we've been noticing in those shows. Is regardless of the age of the learner in the classroom, there's some real common themes and strands within all of it. And it's lovely to see all those things happening within all your three schools and what have you as well. I think it's time now to sort of bring in Al Kingsley to join us and sort of get some of his perspectives as well. Hi there, Al. How are you?
Hi, folks.
Hey, Al.
Can you share a little bit about your background, your context, and obviously the sort of ed tech stuff, but also with the work you do with schools?
I can, yeah. A bit of a mixture of hats that I wear. Most important in this context is I'm chair of a multi-academy trust in the UK in Peterborough, which provides both schools which are all through, so we're 4 through 18, as well as separate secondary and primary schools within the trust. Alongside that, I'm also chair of a cluster of 3 pupil referral units, which are really for some of our most vulnerable young people in the city. I wear another hat as a governor of an infant school, so very much the youngest children. And then collectively around that, I'm also on the board with the Regional Schools Commissioner, so looking at strategically growth of particular academies across the east of England. So I kind of get involved with schools in lots of different ways. When I'm not doing that, my alleged day job is as Managing Director of Net Support. So I've been working in the EdTech field, technology for schools, for 30 years now. So I guess I try and bring a perspective from different sides of the equation on the same sorts of challenges.
Al, what so far we've talked kind of on a micro scale about within our own school context, but on a macro, much larger scale, what do you think the biggest lessons we'll take from this kind of situation is on a national front, as it were?
I think there's lots of different levels. I mean, one of the things we've seen, in terms of some of the challenges that schools have been facing, and it doesn't matter whether it's an individual school or a trust and collection of schools, lots of it starts with how we've developed our leadership collectively, that leaders. And I think we always talk about leadership, and Jeremy alluded to it earlier about inspiring, confidence and consistency and trust. And what we've seen very much is, as we know in most projects or walks of life, the best way to move things forward is about actually getting people who buy into it. So it's about effective communication and how you actually put those policies together, and also buying in both parental and community support. And I suppose one nice strand of that, if there is a nice strand from recent events, is I think there's been, as has been alluded to, a lot more recognition of the actual professional skills and role of educators. I think parents and community have suddenly become quite a lot more respectful, which hasn't perhaps always been the case. I think moving forward in terms of the kind of lessons we learn, really, there's a whole broad range, really. We've identified, I think, for us that, one size absolutely doesn't fit all. It very much depends on your cohort. We cover the whole digital divide across our schools. So when we have the conversation about synchronous or asynchronous, I think for us, the natural persuasion on day one was a very asynchronous model, but we're kind of bringing in different ways of synchronous. There are real challenges that's been touched on about technology and how do we level that. If I learned a lesson, it'd be I wish we'd done our digital strategy a year earlier, because some of the things that sound great are only dependent, or if the technology's there, and actually one step behind that, depending on where you are, if the infrastructure exists. We've spent quite a lot of time and money recently distributing 4G dongles and other resources for the connectivity. And for some families, when budgets are tight and they're out losing their jobs, the first thing that goes are data plans and other bits. Now that's different regionally and about different demographics, but that becomes, I think, a real challenge in terms of that bigger picture. I think we've also learned about the fact that we didn't do enough on CPD, that actually training is key. It's often talked about in the context of, when we talk about what we're doing at the moment, about it being very digital, but actually digital to me seems to be the last bit of the conversation. The first bit is about teachers doing what teachers do well, just simply having confidence. And actually the knee-jerk where it's been less successful is schools that have suddenly tried to embrace lots of new tools, lots of new technology. And actually it's far better to be master of a couple than to be try and introduce lots of different strategies at the same time. And actually, talking to experienced teachers sat on our conversation this evening, the one thing that's been proven and most successful is the skills that are actually key transferred across to remote learning are the exact same skills that a good teacher uses in the classroom. The only things that we've had to adapt perhaps has been more about the different individuals and recognizing that our SEND children need a little bit more of that face-to-face time, reassurance and structure. Some schools have been in a position where they've tried to replicate the entire school day in the same structure and order. And I think some have really set themselves up to fail by trying to do that. And so actually having the courage of your convictions and saying, right now, we're not going to try and do everything. We're going to try and do what we think is the most important things. And we're going to give parents as well as teachers confidence that actually learning can take many shapes. And actually there's lots of project work and things that young people can do with their parents that's just as beneficial to their development. I'm hoping there might be a side effect of this is that when we get back to normality, whatever normality may be, for some families, that will be an approach they continue, and they'll recognize that there is a greater role for parents to actually play in a child's education. And not perhaps the education as a textbook, but actually it's about experiences and working with a child and sharing and explaining and the other strands that go with it. So I think there's lots of lessons we learn from it. And like most projects, you try and do too much too quickly, you're less likely to be successful than if you have the courage of doing what you do well and just adapting certain things to make it more effective.
It's really interesting you talk about it like that, Al. I mean, you've been privy to some conversations we've been having lately as well, but it's lovely to see lots of people actually starting to stop using the sort of phrase home learning or distance learning or online learning, but just talking about learning, because it's learning under the situation we're in right now, and learning's learning wherever you actually work. It's been fantastic to hear that, again, a common strand about the consistent principles of what good teaching and learning actually looks like, and it's good teaching and learning as it looks like under these circumstances now. And it was great to hear that reference that Olly made to the Education Endowment Foundation sort of post. I think it was written by Alex Quigley last week or the other day. Have you got any sort of other lessons that you could sort of share about things that you're involved with lots of schools in lots of different ways, Al? Have you got any sort of key takeaways from the experiences so far that you think might be useful to schools in the UAE?
It's a difficult one because One of the challenges, I think, is that there are lots of strands that are very specific about every school's got a different cohort of staff and students. And I think one of the things, I often say the role when you work as a trustee or a governor is to be that critical friend. And there's a time for critique and there's a time for friendship. And right now, I think there's a lot more value in support and not being too judgmental, because as has been said, everybody's learning right now. This is different. It's full on 100% a different way of doing things. And so I think the first thing is to empower schools to allow teachers individually to have the confidence to do what works well for them and their students and not be too prescriptive in everything that they need to do. I think I've probably mentioned a couple of the key ones, which is to keep it simple. That's lasted me well throughout my years. Focusing on one or two key tools. I think the confidence thing, over the years, Mark, you and I have talked on many platforms about digital strategy and effective use of EdTech. And we've always said, you know what, it doesn't matter how good the tool is, what it says on the label it might do. If a teacher doesn't have confidence when they start it up, it's going to work the way they want it and it will be resilient in the way they need to deliver it, or the children will struggle to adapt and respond on it, it's meaningless. So now's not the time to be trying to develop lots of things. It's much better to focus on those kind of key competencies. I definitely think for many schools, we found it's impossible to try and recreate the structure of the school day, so don't go there. Communication is the one that I think is probably the biggest take, and I take that from my commercial life as much as my education life. We're all very good about talking about communication, and often it ends up diluting down to a few extra emails that come in your inbox, which is absolutely not what people need right now. And one of the nicest strands I've seen is, when things started, I sat there and I used Teams through choice, and most of our schools do. And I've got 5 different Teams accounts for different trusts that I work in and support in different ways. And it started off with the people becoming more familiar. Some used it already. Some it was well, that's just like Skype, isn't it? And that's it, full stop, nothing more. But very quickly, there's a real sense of positivity from staff that actually, by structuring using Teams, making a bit of time at the beginning of the day, they actually, in some cases, have more dialogue and more exchange now than they had the opportunity to do when in school. The time pressures didn't allow. And so I think one of the things is, let's take the positives. If we find ways to communicate better and collaborate better, when we go back to this new norm, let's not lose the things that have worked better remotely and suddenly flip back to the way we did things before. So I think there's an element of actually looking at the things that work well and how they could be adapted into perhaps what is more likely to be, as Jeremy suggested, quite a long road before we get back to everyone back in a classroom, and use that in a mixed way. And I think the most important one, and it links to some of the tools that I do professionally, but as Philippa said, when there's a rush to go online and use tools and engage with young people, it's very easy to forget about safeguarding. And I think that's one that's really, really important. I'm a DPO for the trust, and so I get requests through for all sorts of things where we're trying to say, make sure you fill in a data protection impact assessment and other bits. And the first knee-jerk within the first week of this was a rush of all new online apps that different teachers had seen and thought this might be useful. And there is a vulnerability that, A, you try and do too many things, but also in your haste to deliver what's best for young people, things like pausing it, making sure your policies are adhered to, making sure that data isn't going to the wrong places. You're not the short win making far bigger issues down the line. And that's another thing where I think as leaders, we have an obligation, whatever part we are within the school operation, to not create pressure to deliver pace. What we want to do is to change and adapt that's right, not who can do it fastest. And I think that's a really important one, which is sometimes in business, it's all about who can get to the finish line first. But we have to remind ourselves, in education, it's about who can do it best, right, not who can do it quickest. Much in the same way when we talk about this will be a catalyst, I'm sure, for many organisations, many schools and trusts to go back and revisit their digital strategy. In the same way as Jeremy's got a new question he expects to be asked at any leadership interview in the future, I think the same goes for schools. When we were thinking digital strategy, how much emphasis did we put on remote learning or any kind of term in terms of how we share content and engage with our young people outside the classroom? It was probably a much smaller consideration than now it needs to be. So let's find the opportunities for learning in this. Is what educators, people do best.
That's brilliant, Al. Thank you very much. We've had a question from Linda Parsons, who works at Dara International School. She said there's a place for synchronous and asynchronous learning for all age groups. Have you seen examples of promoting collaborative learning in an asynchronous context? Philippa, have you got any sort of response to that question there at all?
Yeah, we've been doing quite a few different things, and we use Google quite a lot because of the fact that we can collaborate on it. And one of the great ways in which that can happen is that, you know, we've still got students who are actually out of the country at the moment, and they're still able to collaborate with students in their class on a document that they'll be working on as a project. And I think one of the nice ways of being able to do that is some of our teachers have just been throwing out like big questions to a group, and then allowing them to collaborate around that and add things that they've researched and found and linked to that, and then that becomes part of a further discussion. So, you know, throwing, I don't know, a question like how would a pandemic like this have the effect in, I don't know, the Tudor times or something like that, or, you know, something along those lines. And then everybody goes away and has a look at the medical supplies that they would have had then. They look at the things that they wouldn't have had access to, and the different elements around that sort of lifestyle, all linking around a theme that's to do with their topic. But they all kind of come in and out of it across a week's period. And then what happens is that then it becomes this bigger project and this bigger picture of things that they've all done together. So that's quite a nice way of doing it. Another thing that we've been doing is we've been looking at futures events where students have been taking part in online sessions where they jump in and they'll watch a video about something delivered by a teacher, and then they collaborate together on, we've been using Google Hangouts to be able to upload and have that forum where it's all there. So I could log in at 9 o'clock in the morning and pop some bits in and answer a couple of questions. And then, you know, someone else can pop in at midday and answer a few more. And if I go back on later that afternoon, I can see that again and add a little bit more and comment and feedback. And then slowly what becomes is this build of a project that's then going to be presented at the end of it. And I think using some of these platforms online will allow students to hop in and out, whether they are at the same time zone or not. And I think that can be built around any kind of question. We're doing that with things like on Seesaw. One of our year 3 classes have opened up the blog, and they've just been putting wow work and allowing students, whenever they log in, to make a positive compliment about their students' work that they can see. And so I think there's lots of ways of them still being able to collaborate and see that each other are still having recognition for them or taking part in a project together without them being online at the same time. And I think that's really important, especially here at the moment. I've seen a drop off in some of my lessons online in the day because a lot of the students are fasting. And, you know, so a lot of my year 9s are doing, I mean, I've literally just had a submission just then, where they've done it now. They've been working on it. They've had iftar. They're feeling a little bit more energized, and they're going back to do some of their work. And so having things like that where they can jump in and out of it, and there's not necessarily that time frame, but they can see that somebody has been working on it. So they feel, and I think it's quite nice, they feel that connection, and they think, well, I should do something now because they have done it. They've made the effort to go in there and do their bit of the project that we're working on. So I think these group projects and these kind of bigger collaborative ideas, I've seen things about time capsules and things like that, and work really, really well. And even students being able to add a little video in to something so that they can verbalize their idea to their friends is really nice. A nice way for them to be able to connect on projects, but without being synchronous.
I think because there's a lot, like yourself, I'm a secondary teacher by trade, but one of the best things of the job that I have now is the opportunity that I get to work with primary schools. And the idea of big questions and that sort of thing is far more a primary sort of approach than what you might see normally in a sort of a more sort of subject focused lesson with a subject specialist teachers. There's an awful lot that can be learned from primary approaches, I think, in the situation that we're in right now. I'm really mindful, as I'm sure you are, Ollie, that we're actually getting close to the end of the time. It's supposed to be an hour long, and it's almost on the hour now. So let's start trying and wrap things up a little bit soon. But one of the questions that we've got on the list, which is for all of you, really, and if you want to indicate if you want to respond to this, so we don't all talk over each other like we have a few times, sorry. One of the questions is how are you sort of quality assuring online learning in your school? I know I've got my sort of thoughts on that. Yeah, any of you want to sort of come in on that question?
I can talk about that a little bit. I mean, I just think it's inhumane for me to look over my teacher's shoulders and observe their actual lessons right now with students. It just doesn't feel right. It feels gross, and it's not something that I'm really interested in. So our approach has been really to have regular meetings with teachers before they're teaching their lessons, understand what they have coming up for their 6-week plan. That was what we initially had to do for Abu Dhabi. Now we've extended another 6 weeks to take us through the end of the school year, and just have more of, like what Al was describing, of a critical friends approach. One of the big concerns for us, particularly in Al Ain, where it's more traditional, is vetting of content. So we have to make sure we have a really strong handle on, from the social studies teachers, what topics are being discussed in the curriculum maps, and what content is being used. So really trying to take more of a critical friends approach and work with teachers. But I don't think they need the stress of me dropping into their office hours to put them on some rubric. So we're professionals, we're doing the work together, we're collaborating, but I've seen horror stories from Tom Rogers and Rogers History about people having these, really heavily scrutinized online observations. That's certainly not our approach right now.
That's definitely my sort of thinking as well, really. That's why I kept my mouth shut, because I didn't want to sort of steer the response, really. But I'm with you, now isn't the time to be punitive. It's the time to be supportive and recognise and demonstrate trust. And again, I guess that brings it nicely full circle back round to what you were saying right back at the beginning, Jeremy, about relationships, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Ollie, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I just listening to Jeremy say that, I completely agree, and it kind of sparked a thought in my head with a lot of what Al was talking about, was that a sustainable approach. And I think we have to trust our teachers. Relationships are at the heart of everything we do, and whilst we're in this position that we're all in, it's massively important that we look after each other and concentrate on everybody's well-being, and adopt an approach that is really sustainable, because we could be in this. I mean, we've been in it so far. We're in week 7. Hopefully it won't be, we won't be having the same conversation in week 20, 30, 40. So I think that, sustainability is fingers crossed, Jeremy, sustainability is a massively important thing here. So I think in terms of kind of looking at Q&A, you've just got to trust your teachers that they're doing the best that they possibly can do. And I struggle to think of a teacher in my PLN that doesn't care about what they do. So I think that kind of strikes a chord with me, really. It resonates. And I'm pretty sure it does with the rest of, our guests tonight.
Did you want to just sort of come in at the end there, Al?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, I'm really reassured to hear Jeremy's position on that, because we took a view and said, look, at some point there's going to need to be more structure. But right now, the most important thing is, yes, looking to make sure we're delivering the right kind of content. But are our kids actually engaged? Are they learning? Are they sharing? Are they having fun? Are they interactive with their teachers and, where possible, with their peers? And I think right now, back to that word sustainability, given the uncertainty and the change, as long as our children are engaged and learning something and collaborating with their teachers, then, trust the professionals to do the best they can in the current situation. And the time for reflection is down the line.
Well, I think that sort of brings us, thank you for that final comment there, Al. I think that sort of brings us to the end of our first show. We've had some lovely comments throughout the whole show. We've had Nigel joining us, a question from Linda. Nigel's just said, so much symmetry with our position in what we're all saying. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you, Al. Thank you, Philippa, for joining myself and Ollie on this, our first show. I'm sure we can get into the analytics everywhere, but our approach, and we talked about this before, really, if we can just help one person in one school and help have an impact with just that one person, then for us, that it's not about numbers and all the rest of it, really. It's just about trying to share those things outwardly. So thank you so much for taking the time out of your evening to share with us the great things that are going on in your school. It's been really, I think, like Nigel's saying here, actually, there's the symmetry. We've got another one here as well from Nick. Great points of discussion and useful moving forwards. Thank you, Nick. So, Ollie, did you want to sort of say anything before we sort of sign off?
Shall we give a little bit of information about show 2?
Yeah, we can do, absolutely.
Yeah, fantastic. So really excited to announce that in show 2, we are going to look at safer digital ecosystems in schools. We've got some fantastic guests lined up. We've got Barry Lee Cummings, who's at Cyber Safety UAE. We've also got Alan Cocker, who's very, very experienced head, and also a colleague of mine. And we've also got e-safety advisor, who otherwise known as Al McKenzie. So really, really looking forward to delving a bit further into much of the conversation that we've had tonight, with a safeguarding hat on whilst we're in this period of learning in an online environment. So really looking forward to that. But also, once again, I'd just like to say a massive thank you to Jeremy, Philippa and Al for all of their reflections and sharing this evening.
Absolutely. Thank you very much indeed, everybody. Thank you. And thank you for taking the time to watch. Thank you very much.